Okay, we're live.
Good morning, everyone. Sage Turner, Chair of Asheville Region Consortium. I'd like to welcome you to the March 22nd, 2023 Asheville Regional Housing Consortium meeting. We are streaming on our virtual engagement hub, and that's accessible on the front page of the website under the virtual engagement hub link. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. To do so, you call 855-925-2801 and enter meeting code 8763. That's 855-925-2801, meeting code 8763. For those of you out there listening and joining us today, welcome. I'm going to go through and introduce all board members and staff leadership. So as I call your name, you could quickly come off mute and say a quick hello. Robin Mill.
Good morning, everyone.
Karen Kina. Ben Woody. Jennifer Miranda.
Good morning.
Eric Rufa. Elizabeth Hanson.
Good morning.
Don Connett.
Good morning.
Jonathan Jones.
Good morning.
Matt Cable.
Good morning.
Emily Brewer.
Good morning, everyone.
Forrest Gilliam.
Morning.
Hurley. I don't think I saw him.
Good morning.
Oh, good. They don't all fit on my screen anymore. Kate Hayes.
Morning.
Alice Berry.
Morning.
Great. Wonderful. We have I'll introduce some staff leaders as well. Community and Economic Development Director, Nikki Reed.
Good morning, everyone.
Community Development Coordinator, Dana Alley.
Good morning.
Great. Okay. I'm jump right to the agenda. And because we have quorum, we're going to finally tackle some of these old approved. Okay, so I'll be calling out agenda numbers to you with me. So we've completed agenda item 1. We're moving on to 2, approval of the accident. We have 3 here. 2023. We're going to have to do a vote for each of them, I believe. And then we'll have March 6th and March 17th as well. So going with October 21st, any changes, suggestions, or may I get a motion?
So moved.
In a second.
Don Connett.
Second.
Thank you. And I got a roll call vote. I'm a little concerned. I don't see you all on my. I'm going to do it as I see you. Robin?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Forrest? Forrest? I'll come back to you. Jonathan Jones?
This is Forrest, yes. Sorry.
Thank you. Jonathan Jones?
Also, yes.
Matt Cable?
Yes.
Ricky Hurley?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
I don't want to see the others. Oh, you're on a list. Gosh, who have I missed? I can't see you all. This is weird.
This is Jennifer. Yes.
Okay, thank you. It says there's 7 others and I can't see you, so sorry. You're all very small.
Liz, yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Alice Berry, I had an internet interruption, so I missed what the motion was.
Oh, okay, just proving minutes, and we have 3 of them, so we're going to do this 3 times, unfortunately.
I'm having trouble hearing you, so unfortunately.
If you want to disconnect and then try and call in,
Yeah.
you can do without the video.
Thanks, Gal. Sorry
Okay,
about that.
That's okay.
It may be on your end because you keep cutting in and out for me as well.
Okay, it probably is. Yeah.
And Sage,
No,
yeah,
I mean on Ms. Turner's end.
Same for me, Ms. Turner.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm sure what to do about that, and I can't see everyone. Well, let's quickly get through this minutes. Hopefully you can hear me. We're going to now do, so that passed. We're going to now to March 6, 2022. Can I get a motion in a second?
Motion.
Second.
Second. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
going to call you. See you, Alice.
that was a motion from Elizabeth Hanson and a second from Emily Brewer.
Oh, thank you. Alice?
Yes.
Robin,
Yes.
Bonnet,
Yes.
Forrest,
Yes.
Jonathan Jones,
Yes.
Jack Cable,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
who's out there that I can't see?
Jennifer, yes.
Jennifer. Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's
Yeah.
passed. Oh, who was that?
That was Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Hanson.
Okay, I'm having a hard time. Okay, thank you. That passed. All right, on to the last one, March 17th. Can I get a motion and a second?
So moved. John Connor.
This is Kate. I'll second.
Okay, one last time. Alice,
Yes.
Robin,
Yes.
on it.
Yes.
Forrest,
Yes.
Jonathan Jones,
Yes.
Matt Cable,
Yes.
Ruth Early,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
All right, we are done with that for a while. Thank you. Okay, on to the more exciting things. We have what Nick is going to run us through a little bit of an overview, and then we're going to run into fund recommendations and allocations. So queued up is Nikki, and item number 3 on the agenda.
Great. Thank you so much. And so Thana, if you want to go ahead and pull those slides up and share your screen, we'll get started. And so for our meeting today, this is our funding meeting, so we're excited to be at this point. And I just have a brief overview, and then really our plan is to turn it over to the chair to really facilitate the conversation around the funding recommendations. I will go ahead and share that we are joined today by 2 consultants that assisted city staff with the evaluation of the evaluation of the applications, as well as the eligibility requirements of the home program. Stephen Latham and Peter Hughes are with TDA Consulting, and TDA Consulting has worked with the city for a number of months, and they really know the home program well, so we're happy to have them join us today. And so why don't I kind of walk us through the slides, and then we'll get started with the funding discussion. So Thana, if you want to advance the slides to the next one. Okay, so just a bit of background around the application process. It opened in December, and then applications were due in February 3rd. From that time frame, February to March, staff worked with TDA to evaluate the applications and determine eligibility. Then in March, you all heard from the applicants really just last week. And then after today, once we have a funding recommendation established by this body, we will then proceed with a public comment period, and that's a HUD requirement that we administer. So that public comment will last and close in May. And then finally, as a final step for authorization, the consortium's recommendations go to City Council for the final authorization for the city to submit the annual action plan on behalf of the consortium. Next slide there. So we wanted to just share out all of the applications that were received. So you can see quite a number. There's definite need in our community for affordable housing and these programs that are offered by our providers here. We wanted to share, we got just under $8 million in asks from our regional partners. Next slide. And of that, we did want to reflect the revised total. A few of those applications were deemed ineligible. Again, working with TDA on evaluating that eligibility. And so really what we're here today is to work through the request that totals 5.6 and really see what applications we can move forward for funding today. All right, next slide. Okay, just a little walkthrough of the funding availability. I want to make sure I get this right, and there are some nuances here, so I wanted to make clear it is also defined in the staff report, but I just wanted to make sure that we all walk through and we understand where these numbers come from. So first we have the annual allocation that comes from HUD, that's about 1.3. And then the next line item is program income. Normally it is not that high, but this past January we did have a prior loan that was paid off prior to its maturity date. So we are showing that as a receipt into the program as program income. And so that estimate is 428. Then we do have some return funds. I'm sure you all remember the conversation last fall where we had some return funds from tax credit projects that did not advance. And so we had at the time had really talked about what to do with those return funds. It was ultimately decided a couple things. One, it was decided that we would just carry forward those return funds to this funding cycle. But you can see, we've also reflected the other intent of this body as discussed last October. The intent would be to fund Helpmate's FY22-23 full commitment. So you're just seeing the delta there. I think they had asked for roughly 170. At the time, the commitment was about 150 and some change. So you're seeing that delta there reflected as a negative number, okay? The second piece, so the next line item is the Madison reallocation. That is the CHCMC, Community Housing Coalition. You see that reflected as a negative number there because as we had all agreed to fund Madison in the last allocation, it was determined that they were not able to perform their project as designed using CHOTO funds. So instead, we want to, again, value that commitment, right, that was made previously, but then take that out of our existing availability of funding and therefore show that as a negative number here in our receipts. What that yields is a total amount of 2.4 and some change. But then again, now let's look at the available to award line items. You're now seeing that as a positive number from the CHOTO funds. So really now that we have allocated from our non-CHOTO to Madison County, we're seeing that that is now reflected as a CHOTO receipt in this year's availability to award. We're also seeing that 15%, that's really 15% of the annual allocation that's available for CHOTO in this year's cycle. That's 197 and some change. We're also pulling out the 10% administration budget for our staffing costs. That's of the allocation and of program income, so 174 there. And then we're seeing our non-CHOTO award. So that's a total of the carry forward plus this year's allocation for about 2 million. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, that's all enumerated in the staff report, but I just wanted to be clear on the numbers. All right, next slide.
Can we
Okay.
interrupt real quick just to make sure everybody understood? Any questions about that particular table and funding, reorganizing?
And as long as Jonathan says good, then,
Okay.
then I'm good.
This table does not reflect return CHOTO funds from previous years mentioned in the staff report, correct?
I don't think so. I think this was just from the Madison County allocation.
Okay.
What do we need to know about that? There's previous that we still need to reallocate?
Yes, there's 403,000 that had been returned from projects that had been funded as CHOTOs that returned them. I don't recall right off the top of my head which projects they were, but they've kind of been through the process once or twice of being allocated and returned and then reallocated again.
All right, well then we will need to revise that because that is not reflected here, but that's significant. So that means we have a significant increase in CHOTO funding for this year.
Let me make sure I understand, because when I total this 205, 614 and 197.54, I get 403. But you're talking about an additional $403,000 from previous years unlinked to Madison County's little swap issue, right? Jonathan, is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm asking. I think the 403, I guess that is my question.
Right.
One of the bullet points.
Yeah.
So together,
403.
so Sage is right. Together, the existing CHOTO allocation and then the carry forward for Madison County do total 403. Does that conform with what you're saying, Jonathan? I was caught off guard there for a second, but I think that means we're equivalent.
Believe so.
Yeah. Okay. Because yes, together.
The available. There's not previous year funding that also needs to be added to this table.
That's my understanding, is that this CHOTO the CHOTO budget that we have that we're working with right now is 403, and that's the carry forward from the Madison reallocation plus this year's percentage.
Okay, I guess I thought I heard Jonathan say there's additional years previous, but someone can do that after this meeting, I guess. We don't need to freeze the meeting for that. And just let us know ASAP.
Okay, I think we're saying the same thing, but yes, we'll check on that. But
Okay, thank you.
okay. One more question. Yes.
It's not far. I understand the top part of 2.4. My math comes off 20,000 or so. I may not understand the CHOTO section. How do those three numbers come to 2,098,000?
Oh, you're right. I apologize. That is a typo. I
It's like
apologize.
2,067,000 or something's what I, so, okay, good.
You know, in the staff report, you guys have a set of spreadsheets that are your recommendation that are editable, like ready to be edited live as we go through the meeting. Do you want to just jump to that and make these corrections? So, or do you need, I guess you're in the middle of a slide presentation. No, but we're going to need to know the numbers before we get.
Yes, I apologize. That is a typo on my part. Let me revise that. I think it let me revise that. I'm so sorry. My apologies. All right, well, let me kind of complete this section, and then I will make that change in the funding allocation. But I apologize. That's a typo on my part. So let me just make sure that I can get that settled for our final decision making. Okay, well, let's go to the next slide. But like I said, when we get that funding allocation discussion started, we will ensure that those numbers match. But I think it was a typo on my part. So again, looking at our home applications, we do have TDA on hand today to really walk us through, or just be on hand basically for the consortium as a resource, so that as we start to look at funding recommendations, if there are any technical questions that come about, TDA can be on hand to assist, especially as it relates to the use of the CHOTO funding, as we've discussed, or of any other principles around allocations that we might need to consider, especially having to do with eligibility. That's really why we want TDA to support this process and to support the consortium in the decision-making, as they are really experts in this field. When we were looking at funding allocations, we wanted to be guided by certain principles that come through as we look at our bylaws for this consortium, as well as general principles of home funding. Because we're a regional board, we really want to ensure that regional collaboration and regional parity. Also, it seems to be a good practice to provide full funding to the greatest extent possible. As we all know, these projects these days are experiencing a lot of different cost challenges, labor concerns, things like that. So really providing full funding to the greatest extent possible seems to be a best practice for funding decisions. We also want to acknowledge that home funds are really well spent when they're the quote unquote last in, meaning that projects have secured a lot of the funding that they are looking for, but at the very point where home funds are being requested, they truly are the last in to really make the project happen. And so with that, we want to prioritize projects that really demonstrate strong project feasibility. Lastly, of course, this body is also governed by a consolidated plan. That consolidated plan really covers the period of 2020 to 2024. And those priority needs are clearly listed in that consolidated plan. I think the next slide actually shows those. There we go. So really just looking at how we advance rental housing for households, special needs housing, you can see that list there, but this is really how we look at applications on a year-by-year basis. Okay, next slide. Again, that's just the process of showing where we are. After today's funding allocation, then we'll commence the public comment period. And next slide there, Thana. I think that concludes.
It's actually the end of your presentation.
All right, so at this point, what we will do is we will migrate into the conversation around funding applications. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And again, I will need to look at that funding.
I think that document that's kind of a live edit document. Yeah, that's the one.
We will work on this, yes, as we go. So I wanted to walk through, and then otherwise, Chair Turner, I'll turn it over to you to really talk about funding awards, and we will make sure that our data is correct. Hopefully everyone can see this okay. All right, so I wanted to walk us through kind of the first part of the recommendation, but as you'll see, there is still funding that needs to be allocated to really round out the funding recommendation. So what this reflects is really some decisions that were easier than others in correspondence with those funding principles that we've looked at earlier. I want to start by talking about Fairhaven Meadows. And so that is line number 3 here. Their request was at $350. Again, their request really does correspond with those funding principles that we discussed earlier. They're very close to being ready to go. This is the last funding in. This body has previously funded Transylvania County and this project in particular. And I think we heard a strong presentation from that group. So really having this funding as the last in makes a lot of sense. So that was really an easy recommendation to make for the consortium's consideration. Then really looking at the parity with other counties, we see Madison fully funded for the Community Housing Coalition's requested awards of this year. You'll scroll down and see that we are also recommending the tenant-based rental assistance for Helpmate for the Asheville-Buncombe area. You'll see that for Henderson County Habitat for Humanity and their down payment assistance program. We're also recommending full funding there, and Homeward Bound for their TBRA for the Asheville-Buncombe area. From that point on, I think the work of the consortium is really to see if you all agree with those funding recommendations or if there's any need to shift that. And then lastly, for the consortium to really consider of these multifamily projects, there's different opportunities that present themselves here with these other multifamily projects. They're at different points along the way. I think we heard that in our last discussion. And so really, I think the focus of our discussions is really where the remaining funding lines up with respect to the multifamily. And so with that, I'm going to scramble and make sure that my numbers are right so I know the total that we have. But Chair Turner, I will turn it back over to you to really walk us through any reflections that we have of the recommendations as presented now, but then also thoughts around the multifamily opportunity that presents itself.
Okay, great. I think that, yeah, there's a couple corrections just right on here in that far right group to fix, but if you could do that while we get going, that would be very helpful because that number is going to change a good bit. All right, so let's do a little round table. If you have thoughts, questions, concerns, goals.
I have one clarifying question before we get past that first section. And the 110 request for the Community Housing Coalition, when that applicant had mentioned that it was originally awarded as a CHOTA project, does that relate at all to the 205 that was reallocated in Madison? If we could just clarify that.
That's my understanding, yes.
That's my understanding as well.
Okay.
Is that this is a separate request for their FY 23-24 program.
Okay.
I was particularly fond of that application, both of them. And, you know, I think we will always try and keep in check. And we know that Buncombe's the largest county, but are we providing options to all counties? So we had a good representation from Hendersonville, from Madison. I mean, it's good. We can just take broad strokes at this and people can say, you know, I really want to support this, or we can talk philosophy. It looks like we can fully fund most things. And then we have this balance for this multifamily. Is everybody good with what's existing? Everybody being fully funded in that top tier? Any concerns about that?
I just wanted to ask, because it comes up, and I know we've had kind of some standing open awards for our tenant-based rental assistance providers. These are Asheville-Buncombe projects. So I just want to clarify kind of where they are with prior consortium awards, if those have been contracted and expended. Just if they have kind of a large outstanding existing commitment, do we need to commit additional funds to those in this round? So just so that I can understand where those applicants are with their tenant-based programs would be helpful.
Okay, so the two on here would be Helpmate and Homeward Bound. Nikki, I think you're probably busy doing spreadsheets. Does anyone? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll invite Christina Harris. She and I talked about this yesterday.
Okay.
If Christina is on the call, she was going to really talk about some of the TBRA existing contracts.
Hey, everyone. I am here. So yes, we do have a few outstanding TBRA contracts. Nikki, if you actually wouldn't mind, I can share my screen because I put a spreadsheet together that kind of lays it all out for you guys to review. Thank you. So it's not the prettiest, but it's what I have at the moment. So if everyone can see this, let me make it larger. So I went through the fiscal years that we have, and it really kicks off at 16-17 fiscal year, or fiscal year 17. And so as you can see from here, we have from fiscal year 2017 to 2019, all of those funds that were awarded for TBRA were fully expended. Where it starts to get a little tricky here is getting into the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville TBRA for fiscal year 18-19. They were awarded $75,000, and at this date, they have available funding at the moment of $56,000 that needs to be kind of dealt with. Moving along, we have the HACA Home TBRA Resident Mobility from fiscal year 2020. They were awarded $50,000. They expended the $1,859. And if you guys know how we kind of do here, if they have some open or outstanding awards on the books, we will hold off. We will kind of hold everything until they've expended that funding down. So that's when, if you're looking down below, that's when things start to kind of build to Matt's point here. Okay, so for fiscal year 21, HACA was awarded $95,000. They have not expended any of that funding at this moment. Homeward Bound TBRA for Buncombe County for fiscal year 2021, they were awarded $100,000. They have not expended any funding at this point. For Homeward Bound TBRA Asheville from fiscal year 2021, they were awarded $80,000 and they expended $74,228. Yeah. Moving on, we're kind of getting into kind of current time here. We have Helpmate Inc.'s TBRA, line 32. From fiscal year 2022, they are awarded $110,000. They haven't expended any of that funding. And that right there is due to getting a slow start to that project and then having other funds that needed to be dealt with. What we do here is we don't want to have a lot of home funds or any funds really open on the books because it starts to muddy the water a little bit. And then if you move down the list here, we have Homeward Bound of Western North Carolina TBRA for Asheville. They were awarded $80,000. They haven't expended anything. We have Homeward Bound of Western North Carolina TBRA Buncombe County for fiscal year 2022. They were awarded $100,000. They have not spent any of that funding down as of yet. We have the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville TBRA Buncombe, or Mobility, excuse me. And this is fiscal 2022 funds. They were awarded $75,000. They have not spent any of that as well. And then we have Helpmate TBRA for domestic violence survivors. They were awarded $150,000. And this is the one that we are going to discuss to add the full total to bring it up to $170,000. And they have not expended any of those funds due to older funds on the books at this point. And then, as you all know, we have the proposed Helpmate and Homeward Bound. Robin?
Wow.
Thanks, Christina. I want to just make sure that I'm understanding
Yeah.
this, that 2.7 has been allocated over the past several years, going back as far as 6 years ago,
Yes.
and only about 20% of that has been spent?
Yes. As of what I found looking back through our file folders, that is what I found.
What's the situation here? Why is this late reporting, late starts, contracting delays?
Yeah.
This is strange. And then I also follow up. Why is Buncombe County, Homeward Bound Buncombe County spending 2021 money before the previous year's money.
So let me just back up. Are you talking about right here for 2020?
Looks like Homeward Bound, Buncombe County up there, 85,000 for 17-18 year.
So that's fully expended. They were awarded 85,000, but in the expended amount, it's at 0 at the moment. So there is.
So I think you actually, that column is, do you mean the unexpended amount?
Yeah. So sorry.
No, that's fine. I think that's what looks confusing. It's just that. So that's basically the remaining balance.
Yes.
There's 500 that's left.
Yes.
Of 2.7.
Okay.
Right.
Telling us we had $2.2 million back unpaid, unused, but you're saying that 516,000 not used.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So that right column available amount is the unspent funding.
So let me just go back because I do want to clarify that. And thank you. I didn't realize that it wasn't clear, obviously. So the awarded amount that they were awarded is in this column H, right? And so what is left, so what is available, the amount that they have to spend from is in this available amount column. So they need to expend the 56,000. Well, actually, no.
Yeah, because
give me 1 second.
You said the difference there. So this is, and I understand you put this together quickly, but I was alarmed.
I want to get that clarified for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me look at what we have here.
It's not as bad as I first.
Yeah, well, but to Matt's point, definitely we do have a lot of work to do with the TBRA funding pool. It's a true statement.
Okay, well, you brought this up. So it looks like we're going to have, what you're bringing up is that Homeward Bound and I guess no help maybe if there's, just Homeward Bound still has a balance and wondering why that is.
So usually what happens when we start to get balances like this, and what I've observed is that agencies start out with already funding open, right? So they've already gone through the process and there is, an outstanding balance to their organization, right? And when that happens, it kind of, from my opinion, holds everything up. And we want to kind of pause there to make sure that we expend those fundings previously built, so that whenever we go down to, say, fiscal year 2021, we can kind of attack that with a clear slate.
So Matt, your concern, are you suggesting that we perhaps do not allocate the $30,000?
Sorry, I just I wanted to get clarification. So if we've changed the amounts, I mean, this looks much better, right? That we have only $500,000 unexpended, but you're saying it doesn't make sense with the helpmate one. Have they spent all of their 2023 allocation, all 150,000?
No, they have not. So this is where I kind of come into play with home in general, is whenever I assume the project manager role for this particular organization, they had already had fiscal year 21-22 funding sitting on the books that needed to be addressed before we could move to fiscal year 22-23. So that's where we're at with Help 8. Go for it, Jonathan.
So I think what would maybe help clarify what the situation is, the column, let's see, rows 32 through 36, right now they're showing that they were awarded, and because they've not gone to contract, that means that they would also need to have a value in column I to show that that amount is still available. So that will show what the.
Let me do that for you guys. Thank you, Jonathan. I originally had it that way, but I didn't want it to be a little confused. So maybe this is a better picture here.
Wait. Okay, now I need more understanding.
Yes.
So at the very top, Homeward Bound, TBRA, year 16-17. They were awarded 55,000. Have they spent the money?
They have expended all the funding. Yes.
Okay. Jump down to Housing Authority of City of Asheville, fiscal year 18-19. 75,000 award. 56,273 is what they have left to spend, or is what they have spent?
Okay, let me pull this up.
I think you originally said 20-something thousand, so I think
Yes.
this.
So they have liquidated $18,727, and they have encumbered. So the available balance that they need to spend down is $56,273 left.
Okay, that's why this is confusing. The first, they're not doing all the same thing in this column.
Okay, gotcha.
It's almost like you could make another column and move these. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely do that for you guys and kind of break it out a little bit.
At the end of the day, so now I'm getting more alarmed because now we're back up to 1.2.
Yeah.
And we're jumping around. I'm sorry.
No, it's completely fine.
We could take a minute and get it right so we know what we're dealing with. But Matt, to your point though, and to the staff's point, if they've got previous years on previous years on previous years, and some of these years they can't even start because they're still working on the previous years, like, do we need to withhold funding from them this cycle and let everybody catch up if possible? It's a $30,000 ask of Homeward Bound, and Helpmate is $157,300. Kate, go ahead.
So I would be okay with that for Homeward Bound. I just want to clarify on the two project scorecards for those. Homeward Bound was the only one that I guess staff had a concern or possible ineligibility for unspent grant funds, and that wasn't noted on Helpmate's scorecard. And so was there a distinction there?
I'm not sure, and now I'm getting a message from Helpmate.
Okay, so I most likely can address that.
So there's another. I serve as the cities of Asheville's Housing Community Development chair too. So we just had another meeting yesterday over different funds, a different group, and I heard from Helpmate yesterday, and they said we just got the first contract like 60 days ago, and that is what she's reminding me of right now. It's the same here. They've spent zero in home funds because they just got a contract 2 months ago. And even though it was supposed to start 2 years ago. So I think we're going to have some of that in here.
Mm-hmm.
Alice, go ahead.
Kate, I had asked the same question via email about the scorecard with Homeward Bound in particular, seeing that it was like maybe eligible, and got an email back from Dana, and correct me if I'm misspeaking, but I think the email said that it had been updated to be eligible after they followed up with other answers to some questions from staff. I can't speak to the Helpmate scorecard though.
Okay. So the 30,000. Matt, you brought this up. Do you have a recommendation on the 30,000?
So I guess what I'm curious about, so I'm looking at the spreadsheet, and I know that everybody's kind of working on the stuff on the fly, which I appreciate. This is always the fun part of the consortium and the virtual meeting as well. But what there are, I guess, Homeward Bound applies for funding and separates them. That's why they have in a single year like two different awards, right? They have their Asheville focused TBRA and then Buncombe County outside of Asheville. And I think they've had, kind of obviously from even the fact that they've spent funding already in Asheville, but not yet in Buncombe County, that they've had a little bit more success or movement in being able to do TBRA within the city limits. It's kind of what that's showing. But regardless of that fact, currently with their existing awarded amount and whether they're encumbered by contract or not, they have almost $350,000 in available funding to spend. Are they going to spend that before their next award contract is available to them? I guess that's my question. And Helpmate, I understand they just went to contract, so they're just now eligible to spend that first $110,000. They have $260,000 awarded. Are they going to, as an organization, be able to expend those funds before they'll be contracted and able to spend this next allocation? I think it's more about making sure that we're not allocating funding that then sits for multiple years unexpended. And TBRA, CARES Act funding and other avenues provided a lot of tenant-based rental assistance, which delayed expenditure of funds in a lot of these programs, and I totally acknowledge that. There are other delays like getting to contract and certain things that happen. It's just the way that these kind of funds work. But and I'm not even going to mention the housing authority because they didn't apply for it, right? Like they have some outstanding balance, but they didn't seek it in this round, or on the list of eligible ones. But I'm just curious if, you know, if they really realistically will spend Homeward Bound as an entity $350,000, Helpmate as an entity $260,000 by the end of next fiscal year, which is when we would anticipate the contract being available. That's more of what I'm asking. And then if they aren't going to be in that position, do we need to award now? Could we possibly award later in the September reallocation or something like that if a multifamily project didn't move forward? You know, our interest as the county is obviously advancing multifamily. I think housing availability will help with tenant-based needs as well. And also just to, you know, address the open multifamily balance, as if there's any way we can make more funds available to try to impact more projects. That's kind of what I'm interested in. But I don't want to say let's cut that without having an understanding of the ability to spend the funds that exist.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate staff working on this. I'm still a little confused by this chart and the difference of the 1.56 million. Nikki, you have your hand up. We're also Robin, the vice chair, and I are having a conversation over here on messages with Helpmate. Maybe we'll hear from Homeward Bound. You're welcome to reach out just to get some clarity. Nikki, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to share with the committee. I think, you know, because we've gone through this home ARP process, and a lot of the information from our stakeholders and our agencies have started to come through about TBRA. I think we heard through that process that TBRA was really hard to make happen because of the lack of availability of units. And I also want to say, I think the benefit of how the allocation is proposed for the home ARP funds right now allows $1 million for supportive services. So I just want to share that, you know, oftentimes when we have home consortium requests for TBRA, they are also accompanied by a CDBG ask. And that CDBG funding, however, is explicit to city limits. And so there's sometimes this log jam because these federal requirements require that the TBRA and its corresponding case management piece that comes from CDBG have to be spent in city limits. And that has been a real hamstring for our agencies, I'm sure. And so what I'm really wanting to explore in our future funding cycles is how we can leverage the home ARP allocation to help advance TBRA outside of city limits, right? Because that way we're able then to use the supportive services, that case management component, to match up with our TBRA annual allocation. So again, this is something that staff, we really just pieced this together yesterday with really looking through these numbers and trying to identify what that log jam might be with the expense, and really trying to understand how we could help support the advancement of getting these dollars into communities that need it. But I think that is an important component that's very nuanced within HUD regs, right? Of having that case management be CDBG, that is city limits dependent, but then now how we have this opportunity with supportive services from home ARP. So again, I want to say that, you know, there are some things that provide more context to how these funding decisions can really change in the next coming months as this body also looks at how to allocate those home ARP funds. So I'm just saying that for context. I don't know if that has any bearing on these funding decisions today, but I wanted to call attention to that and make sure that we come back to that at a later consortium meeting.
Hey, Nikki, can I just throw one comment in real quick? I would focus more on the unobligated or uncommitted amount than the unexpended, because when you're setting up a TBRA activity for a given household for 2 years worth of rent assistance, you don't expend it all at once. And so you could have a grant that is not very much expended, but is in fact essentially tapped out if all of those funds have been committed but are going to get spent down over 24 months, sort of, you know, in kind of roughly even increments. So in terms of kind of assessing like what's the progress, I don't know that the unexpended balance is the best measure. So just food for thought for people.
I agree, and I mean to that point, so we're talking about encumbered funds, and this chart still driving me crazy because I don't understand why they don't total properly. But we really need to just better our system here with this particular, I know we just threw it together, but the encumbered fund is a big deal. I heard it mentioned in some, so that means that you've been awarded, and just like you just said, you have 2 years to spend the money, but it's committed. But balance is drawing down slowly. So that just singularly looking at that balance isn't the answer. We need a column for encumbered, a column for unencumbered, and then we'd really truly know. For right now, when I move this along, it sounds like we are saying let's not commit the $30,000 to Homeward Bound this year. Let's get them spending down previous incomes. Thank you to Hackett for you still have some and not ask for more. And maybe it's going to be able to use the money. They're saying they're also a little confused, but yes, they do plan to be able to spend that money plus this 157. So I'm thinking we commit to that. It feels a little small to withhold just the Homeward Bound, but we love you, Homeward Bound. We think you're full funded. So we're going to hold it in the pot. Let's get back to the editable page, Nick, that you had in your staff report. I think it's hopefully by now updated and has good numbers.
Yes, thank you for the, takes a village to get a spreadsheet, right?
Yes.
So appreciate you all for the allowing us to change that. So now you're seeing our totals do match. And so our non-toto fund is at 1.89, and we're seeing those two totals now match. So okay, and I can certainly be on hand to help us work through these numbers if there is a desire to see how our available balance would change if there's a reduction in any of the funding for what we've just discussed. But again, right now we have a balance of about $750 to allocate, as well as the 400 in Choto. And I will say, we talked with our consultants on whether or not it would be advisable, to really see if we could delay the Choto expenditure and then look at having the additional Choto amount be available for a bigger pot. But at the same time, Mountain Housing Opportunities is one of the projects presented here today that is Choto eligible. And so I wanted to mention too, they have provided additional documentation to staff regarding their Dogwood Health Trust award, as well as their Buncombe County ARPA award. So again, when we're looking through those funding principles, it could be that Mountain Housing could be an eligible and a prioritized project to really fund because of their Choto distinction, as well as the fact that their project is so far along in the process that meets those funding principles as described. So just wanted to provide that additional clarification.
I mean, I'm supportive of just moving the Choto to that now, all 403, 368. Everyone on board with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Robin, I know we had a little talk offline. I know you were able to talk with this applicant. Did you have anything you wanted to share about their needs and a additional funding request there from non-Choto funds?
Sure. So I did talk to Mountain Housing yesterday, and as Nikki mentioned, one of the things that sets this project apart is that with a little more funding, they can actually begin breaking ground this year, as opposed to waiting till next year. So that could get some more units on the ground faster. They are also at the point where there's not many sources left for them to go to get this 1.5. They seem to think that with 750,000 from us, they could still move forward this year.
So staff, that would be 346,632, 346,632. The total limit 750.
Yep, and I'm seeing that total there. Yep.
Thank you, Robin, for having a talk with them. It's very helpful. And I think breaking ground a year earlier makes a lot of sense if we can do that. Are we going to hold this Homeward Bound 30 for the start here? Yeah. Who's editing this? I'm sorry. You are, Nikki. Okay. Do you want to pull it first? I think that's what I heard from the consortium. Speak now if that was not what you understood. Okay. So what we're seeing now is $434,088 remaining balance of non-Choto funds that we can allocate in this period. One of the thoughts I had, I'll just share early on. I see you got your hand up. I'm a little worried there's 7 of you off my screen without your hand up. So blurt out if you're trying to speak up and I can't tell. One I thought I had is that what we typically do in this funding is say, okay, we've got all these tax credit applicants and let's boost their application and give them all a little bit in the hopes that it helps. And then when they are, whoever's awarded will come back together and reallocate all the funds in. I'm curious if 434, well, I mean, it might help an application. I wonder if we just wait and allocate it towards whoever's awarded. But maybe that number is enough to really impact an application. Any thoughts?
So my my initial preference with the remainder would be the Vanderbilt apartments, because I feel like if we can help them get to a place with their renovations, then we're preventing that project from needing more funding later. And I know one of our priorities is new rentals, but that was my initial preference for their project.
Kate, did you get that perception from their paperwork or from their presentation? I kind of got the perception they were already fully funded. And this wasn't like, when I think about this funding and the dire need for some projects moving forward, I think of it in like a but-for way. Like, but for this funding, the project would not move forward. And I wasn't clear on that from Vanderbilt. Go ahead, Matt.
Matt, you're on mute.
Sorry, I clicked on it, but it didn't unmute me. I actually have a question more about the Henderson County project, so I'll let that Vanderbilt discussion.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on Vanderbilt after having been at the presentation? Or
I was thinking Vanderbilt still needed $700,000 to make that project go forward. Did I miss that in the presentation?
You know, it's a little confusing because it sounded like what I heard, if I recall, was, well, if we're awarded this, then we can try and lower some AMIs. But to me, what I've heard in that, now maybe they can reach out, is that they're actually funded, their building is happening. Hey, we would like extra money to make it easier. I just wasn't sure, like, if so one of these tax credit projects that create units can't get over the line, but for that $4,000, that might be more of a concern. You know,
I like the idea of adding units if it helps, but Kate's point makes good sense, and I wasn't able to attend Friday, so.
Okay.
Yes.
I think it would be helpful to get clarity on that point. I was more under the impression that Kate was that, that they're still needing funding to be able to do the extent of renovations that they had in mind.
Nikki or anybody on city staff that have poured over these detailed applications, did anything present to you that suggested otherwise? And Matt, you'll be next.
And I'll invite our Stephen or Peter to chime in here too with regard to Vanderbilt. I think, you know, one of the things that we had discussed as a team was again, Vanderbilt seems to have a lot of the funding that they're sourcing, and really home funds being the last in. So maybe Stephen, if you and Peter want to chime in and really give some insight as to your approach with the Vanderbilt request.
Sure, I'll take a first crack and then I'll let Peter kind of come behind and clean up my mess, but as it were. So I think a couple of things jump out to me about Vanderbilt. You know, one is obviously, and it's a real public policy kind of, we have to make choices challenge, but you know, there's definitely a school of thought that says, hey, you know, as much as we need new units, we also, you know, should invest in making sure that we don't lose units that we already have that are affordable. And so preservation obviously is also a strong priority in many parts of the country for good reason. Just looking at a high level, what I would say is, you know, yeah, $800,000 basically out of 32 million. There's probably some way to kind of make a project workable without that, but it will change the character of the project. And so it might mean that they, you know, again, target at a higher AMI level, still a tax credit eligible, but more units up at the 60 instead of the 50, and may require them to sort of skinny up the rehab. The other thing I would note is that there's several layers to the financing here, but many of those are already them basically kind of contributing back to the deal. So, you know, there's the seller note that really is almost a paper transaction. So they're able to have the sales price at a kind of more of an appraised value, but they're not really getting all of that in cash, where they're kind of selling it to themselves. In effect, they're able to pay off the mortgage, and then they're taking the rest back at a seller note. So it's kind of a paper transaction, but it gets them credits on that amount. They're already deferring better than $1 million of developer fee. They've got general partner equity that's being contributed, and this, that, and the other thing. So to the degree that, you know, NCR is kind of already putting a lot of their own resources into the deal, you know, I think that's at least worth noting. You know, relative to that. Peter, did anything else that you think we should mention about this?
Yeah, just to follow on that, Steve, a couple of additional points. One, of all of the multifamily applicants in this round, National Church Residences is showing the highest LIHTC pricing. So in part due to their, you know, capacity and experience as a developer, the relationships they have in the equity markets, you know, it's not a ton higher than Lakeshore Villas, but it is a penny higher. So they're getting more equity into their deal because of their experience. And then also, they were clearly, from all the multifamily properties, and part of this is a function of it being a rehab, but they are the most conservative in their projections for operating expenses. More on the line of what, you know, Steve and I see with a lot of our clients nationally, almost, you know, projecting almost $6,000 a unit in operating expenses. There's a balancing act there, certainly, right? The more it costs to operate, the lower the debt service you can, the lower the debt that you can service, and the more gap you need. But it's also, as an underwriter, encouraging to see a developer, you know, taking a conservative approach to how they're going to manage the units. Some of that is a function of them having owned and operated the project for the past 15 or 20 years and knowing kind of the nuances, how the building works, where they need to plug holes and that type of thing. But as I said, it's encouraging, in my opinion, when a developer tends to be more conservative in those projections, because it, A, is a little bit more transparent, and B, it shows that they're, you know, at least on paper, planning for the eventuality that there's going to be rainy days and things are going to break and that type of thing, and that they have an operating expense budget that is more robust is encouraging. Those would be the two additional points I would make.
Thanks, Peter. Matt Cable, you had your hand up, then Robin.
Yeah, so I guess, so my understanding or takeaway, and I guess that'd be the correction question that I would have if I understood incorrectly about the Vanderbilt Apartments project, is that if the funding weren't available, the project still stands to move forward, but perhaps certain aspects of the project would be reduced. And I don't say this like lightly, but amenities or extra aspects of that project would be scaled back or eliminated. And I say that because I don't say it lightly, because it is important that our affordable communities have amenities similar to market rate units. So I don't want to diminish that. But in looking at moving projects forward, preserving existing units is important. Providing amenities in all affordable housing is important. But there is the potential that by not allocating to the other projects, that they won't be successful in a LIHTC round. Because for those people going into an application, if they don't have a fully realized capital stack to produce for their LIHTC application, they won't be able to complete the application. So I know we like home to be the last in, or at least in after other major sources have been secured. It can be helpful in advancing an open or pending application as well. So those would be the WT's projects in Buncombe and Henderson, as well as LDG's project in Buncombe. So those are all ones that are actively seeking those tax credits. So that could be the difference in them even being able to move forward in an application cycle. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And it does tie into the Henderson County question I had. So I'm curious from our Henderson County representatives of, if there is more interest in trying to fund that rental construction project, even if they would have to forego some of their down payment assistance, like, what is their interest level in that project in Henderson County as well? So that's the tie-in and Henderson County question that I had.
Oh, great. Thank you. So let's let Robin, and if anyone from Henderson County wants to speak to two projects, that would be helpful. Robin?
So I don't agree. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't disagree with anything that's been said about the Vanderbilt project. However, rehab of rental housing is just a lower priority for me than the other things that we have the potential to fund. And I am only one vote, but I don't support funding that project, and I'm not going to vote to fund that project. And that's just where I stand with it. And if we can't come to a resolution regarding giving the 434 to one of the LIHTC projects, then I would suggest giving that to Mountain Housing and getting them even closer to their goal.
Okay, so we hear from Hendersonville. Robin, my concern there is that, again, that money might make one of those applications stronger. But I guess if none of them are awarded in fall, we could reallocate to MHS. And to Matt's point, the creation of new units still moves forward. And while I really appreciate what you said about amenities too, Matt, I think it's very true. I just didn't get from this that it was going to be that crucial. So, okay, does anyone from Henderson want to speak to down payment assistance or spring construction, and if there's a priority from your county on either or?
I know from the planning department, kind of business community development side of the county, rental construction is definitely a higher priority. Again, not having enough physical units. And I think, especially in our comprehensive plan and moving forward, that is something that we are making a high priority is the actual construction. So I would, I'm leaning a little bit more towards that as well.
So just to be clear, would you recommend that we not fund the $320,000 for the Habitat down payment assistance and instead fund the rental construction there in the bottom line? Or are you saying keep both if you can?
I think keep them as they are now. Personally, I just like the rental construction better than down payment assistance. But I can let John or Jennifer speak to that also.
Okay.
Yeah, this is John. Being a new guy, I've just been sitting here listening. So I think, we definitely the new construction. We need the units. This project has been around a couple cycles now, and so I think I like the new construction. I'm a little torn because I do support the efforts of Habitat with down payment assistance and trying to get folks into those units. But I think the priority should be getting more units on the ground, and the rental construction would get more units versus what Habitat would put forward. So,
does anyone know each of these apps? Maybe the consultants will actually be able to answer this question. I can look it up. How many times each of these have applied? Because that suggests a WDT has applied several times for this project, or a tax credit award. Sometimes it takes several. And I'm just wondering if some of these are first application cycle.
I think WDT, this is at least their second, when and maybe the third time, because I when I listened to his presentation, I know they've scaled it back from 72 to 60 units, so it's at least second, maybe third time they've submitted.
These are all percents, right?
I'm sorry.
Oh, just generally talking everybody 9%. Okay, Kate, go ahead.
So I just wanted to throw out, would it be beneficial at all to, I know TDA in their report on the Habitat project said that because each home could really be considered its own award on its own, that amount could potentially be prorated down to where they could still have some down payment assistance, but maybe not the full number of houses.
That's a good point, Kate. Alice, and then Matt.
I think I just found it in the application materials, but I hadn't had good notes about the WDT development AMI levels, but it looks like they're looking for a split between 30%, 50%, and 60% AMI. But I'm not seeing specifics about that balance for them.
I think it was an averaging. Matt Cable, go ahead.
And I think my question is more a question that the applicant themselves would have to answer, but staff may kind of have already had these conversations with them. But WDT's project in Henderson County, so let's say if we tried to allocate $400,000 to that project, or some amount, that balance amount to that project, is there's going to be created a gap. So assuming that the pro forma that they were using as the basis to make the level of request they needed from the consortium, whatever isn't funded of the $898,000 request, they have to have a different source to put in that space in order for the application again to move forward. So anything that's not funded, they have to identify a different source to make the pro forma complete for their application. I guess my question is, do they have another alternative source to fill in the gap that would still create? Because otherwise then we're just putting that $434,000 as a placeholder for a project that's not going to be able to even move to application. So if we know that would be, I think, helpful in determining what kind of allocation we should make.
Yeah, what we're really saying here is, how can we allocate this 434 to get a project over the application line? And then, as usual, come back in the fall and reallocate to whoever was actually awarded. Consultants, any input on that? Peter does, and then we'll go Emily.
This is Peter again. So just real quickly to echo on Matt's comments there. I believe that the last project on the list for WDT is their White Pine Villas proposal. And part of the challenge further, just to emphasize Matt's point, is the pro forma that they presented us, when they presented it to us, even if you funded the full $898,414, still had a $1.4 million gap. So the pro forma they originally submitted wasn't balanced. My recommendation would be, if you're going to choose a WDT development, the Villas at Haywood was a much more thoroughly put together application. It seems to be much further along from a design standpoint, that type of thing. And I don't have the kind of temporal presence to know which of those two is more important from a geographical standpoint, or which one's been in the queue longer. But certainly Villas at Haywood was presented with a balanced pro forma, that type of thing, just for quick reference there.
Thank you. That's very helpful, because that means if we did allocate 34, they'd still have sound like even $1.5 million left to close, not just 400. Okay, John Conant has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, can I ask Peter a question? And I don't know whether Peter
Sure.
knows, but I remember hearing somewhere, and just if you look at the scoring criteria for White Pines, that and I know we deferred housing assistance program down the road because they couldn't fund infrastructure. But do I remember hearing that from a LIHTC scoring, the White Pines project was still not in a great position from a scoring position? And I don't know that we get into that at this point, but I just, again, if we're looking at allocating that last 434, does that come into consideration?
Right. That's a good point too. One more question because we've got one on here we haven't discussed yet. I'd like to hear from Matt Cable on that because Buncombe County on Maribel, the LGG development, the $500,000 request isn't enough to put them over the line. It's not even really close, right? There's a big ask of Buncombe County behind that as well.
Yeah, so just to be transparent, and Buncombe County and the city do provide local funds to support a number of the projects that come through the consortium. In this particular round of consortium requests, we all of the projects aside from Vanderbilt Apartments that are within Buncombe County that are rental have made a request to us and have an existing commitment, or have made one where we are considering our commitment level. So in full transparency, Maribel has made a request for over $9 million in a loan to Buncombe County. So the asset consortium is relatively small compared to that. Lakeshore Villas, we have an existing commitment through our ARPA funds that was actually used to assist MHO in acquiring property, and they've requested a loan amount from the county as well. For that particular project, that's over $3 million. So there'll be, $6 million potential investment in that project. The villas at Haywood, so that particular project has requested the same amount of the consortium and the county, and that was our advisement to them. So that is their real gap, right? So if the consortium provides funding, the request to the county is reduced by that amount. In the case of Maribel, if the consortium doesn't provide funding, then that's a gap that's created that we have to reconcile and then perform up on the county side. So, I mean, the county has an interest in all of these projects advancing and have existing commitments on 2 of the 3 projects, and potentially will have a commitment on all 3 projects in the next budget cycle, so in fiscal year 23. So we definitely have an interest in funding support on any and all of the 3 projects at this point. Our prioritization of Lakeshore Villas is due to the fact that it has an existing tax credit commitment. We have an existing investment in that project with our ARPA funding. We have an existing ask to our Affordable Housing Committee and the County Commission ultimately to provide a loan for that project. So there's some existing ties to that project. Also have an interest in the other 2 as they are seeking county support as well through a competitive tax credit and a non-competitive tax credit avenue. So I just, I like to be transparent about the fact that we have an open application process going on as well. So decisions made at the consortium will ultimately impact how we view and support those projects with local funds.
Thank you, Matt. I'll have a comment then Forrest and then Emily. So what I took from that is Villas at Haywood, that if we were to fund them 434, the county could also do 400, I think it's 400, that would actually get them over the line. That's their true gap. And that feels pretty good to me. Forrest and then Emily.
Yes, the geographic distribution within Buncombe County impacts each of us because we're closer to various spots, and the Maribel project in Weaverville is of interest to Madison County a little bit too, because that would be the closest to us. But I understand all these. I'm not saying that we got to do that, that I say we have to do that because of that, but I'm wondering, and I know Matt's being you're doing a very good job of being careful here because you got to deal with all of them. But am I also hearing that none of these are make or break, or y'all have some funds to be able to do some things, or you can't say yet, or I'm just I'm not asking a question necessarily here, but I want to make sure that we're looking at the entirety of Buncombe County. We got a project down in Arden that's very close to getting done, looks like, if we can get all this done. So I understand that. But I also see something that's on the northern end of the county that's starting to see the level of growth we saw 10 years ago in the south. And I just want to make sure that we're kind of balanced there.
That's a good point. I echo that Matt's doing a good job here. It's a hard one because what we really want to know is, hey, are you going to fund Buncombe County, going to fund Maribel $9 million and Governor puts them over the line? You can't answer that. I mean, unless you want to try.
I can say what our process is. So just for clarification, we have an application window that opens. It closed in February. Those applications are reviewed by the Affordable Housing Committee, which is a subset of the board, and they, as a subcommittee of the board, make a recommendation to the full board on which project should receive an allocation of typically general fund dollars, and then that goes into our budgeting process. So it becomes like a request in the budgeting process for the general fund. So we can't commit anything really until July 1 when the budget is adopted and in place. But that's the process. So we're actually in middle of application review now. The committee will make its recommendation at the end of April. The board will approve the budget sometime in June per statute. And then the actual commitment is formal and official July 1 with the budget creation. So, each of these projects is being reviewed by the committee in a public setting, a lot of analysis of their pro formas, identifying any existing gaps, and determining, the action by the consortium to allocate funding will become part of that, understanding of where their project is, and where a project doesn't receive that funding, where it was contemplated to be there in the application materials we receive, we'll have to ask the applicant, how are you going to, without that funding or that level of funding, fill that gap? So it's not a decision we make at the staff level, and staff are the representatives to the consortium. So we look at projects and try to evaluate which ones we support as a county. It doesn't mean we don't support them all in one way or another.
And Maribel's gap is bigger, am I right in looking at that? Or is that without y'all's, if their request to you for that gap funding is the biggest?
At this time, yes, their open application and request to us is the largest request. It's within our limits, so we do cap the amount that we can invest based on a unit construction cost. So it's a percent of that unit construction cost. So what they've asked for is within our ability to fund, but this is a $500,000 gap. The other reality that we haven't even touched on is pro formas change by the minute. So the volatility and interest rates and other things mean that we can close the gap today and the gap may be different tomorrow. So we're operating in that reality as well.
Matt, clarifying question too. So if Buncombe County isn't going to allocate or award money until July and it's straight for an application, so this doesn't strengthen their application at all.
So what we can do is issue the letter of commitment. There's a template that you can provide as a funding commitment. And we've been able to issue that based on the budget preparation. It's kind of, all local governments find themselves in those odd situations where you can't, under statute, commit funding until the year you're in it. But grant applications and other things, you just have to ensure that the way you word it is clear that the commitment would be effective on this date. And
Emily, what you?
So what I'm hearing you say, Matt, is that well, in the project sources and uses submission from the Maribel project, they have listed Buncombe County as a $1.2 million contribution. And so you're saying that that's not even on there yet. And that's a big red flag in my mind that it's already listed in their sources.
Yeah, so to be clear, we have an existing commitment. So they were awarded funds last cycle and they've asked for additional funding from the county with a new pro forma. So they have an existing commitment that does exist in that amount. And then there's an additional request to the county. So basically increasing the commitment based on a number of changes to the project, market conditions, loan interest rates. The list goes on
Thank
and
you for the
on.
clarification.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is an existing commitment from Maribel, but it is not the full request that they need at this point.
Anybody else have comments or questions? Because I'm hearing what I think is getting behind Villas at Haywood, because it has the smallest gap. We want all these projects to move forward, first of all. But it has the smallest gap. This is a realistic gap. It's not going to have a $10 million ask. It's another body. It puts them over the line. The county can do a 400 with it as well. And that the other White Pine Villas is maybe in their third round. They have an additional 5 beyond that. That the Maribel, my understanding is the project is great, and Weaverville and even Buncombe County would love to see it happen. But there's so much unknown. Maybe they'll be awarded this fall, and if that's the case, we can come back and reallocate. But I guess, for sake of time, how many of us are on the screen, how much has been said, I'm going to suggest what I think I'm hearing is move the 434 there. But if this is not what you are feeling, now's your time to speak up, raise your thumb, raise your hand, whatever it is. If you're generally supportive of that, just stick that. Okay.
So what do we have any sense on if that would, oh, and Sage, sorry, I'm looking at the sheet and I thought you were talking about the villas at Haywood.
So they've asked for 834. If we put our 434 in there, what I heard was they have a concurrent ask of the county, and that this 834 is their true gap. That is what's left to get it over the line. And if we can do our 434 and potentially before they can get there.
So would the gap in Mountain Housing Opportunities, would that still allow them to move forward with that project? I mean, since what I heard though was that this was kind of their last source of funding that they could seek.
I think so, and I think this what we heard from Robin meeting with them was that this would get them breaking ground.
And if I may chime in, I will say that we need to examine our previous year's CHODO allocations to ensure that we have the right figures. Jonathan mentioned earlier in the meeting that we would need to look into that. I do want to say to the committee that we need to look at the prior years, prior to fiscal year 22-23, to really understand if there are any additional carry forward CHODOs. I would also say that if we do find that there are CHODO funds that have been returned, I guess there's something about CHODO funds that might have the specific requirements that kind of limit their use or the eligible entities that can use them, that we may be able to consider additional funding for MHO to supplement what we've got earmarked already. And so, however, I do need to take the time to ensure that we have the right figures. But I do think we could further close that gap with any of that additional return funding from the CHODO prior year's request. And in Jonathan and I's communication, we're estimating anywhere from 200 additional funds from prior years prior to 2023. And we still got to figure out that 2023 to make sure that our numbers match, but it could be at the minimum 200,000, which would help further close that gap.
I mean, I was listening, that's very good news for them, right? Forrest, go ahead.
Just curious about the maximum on the two.
Matt?
200 to what?
200 to 429. Jonathan and I are texting back and forth looking at that.
And
that's what that's for.
And I think y'all need to get out of here to figure that out, because it's, I know how that I've done that before, and we know it won't work. So or it might work, but I would just suggest that if it is that big a gap, if it's that much of an unknown, that we get back together and talk about it if we can. I fully support doing it, but I'd rather us talk about it and see what the impact would be, because if it's 400, then there'd be some big impacts. But yeah.
Hey, Nikki, this is Steve. 2 quick points. As we've discussed, any CHODO funds from your 2020 allocation or prior are now in a position that they could be moved out of the Choto set aside. So just recognizing there's some optionality there with prior year funds, that they don't have to stay locked in the Choto set aside. It doesn't mean that you should thumb your nose at Chotos, but it also gives you the flexibility not to let that sort of unnecessarily distort decision making, right? And not suggesting that that's kind of the direction you're going, but it's that's just the way I talk about that flexibility sort of writ large with PJs everywhere. And then again, and I apologize, I don't remember who made the point, but we will absolutely concur with that. Pro formas change daily. We're closing a whole bunch of deals right now with other clients, and it's like, hey, here's the Tuesday version and here's the Thursday version, and this just changed by $6 million. Now those are also, there's some other context of crazy deals, but looking just at their pro forma sort of at face value, not being in a position to truly underwrite, because that's the other challenge is you got to make these commitments and everybody has to keep moving forward, proving that they can actually deliver what they said. But there's probably in the neighborhood of plus or minus $600,000 or $700,000 of room to defer some additional fee in the case of the Lakeshore Villas. And so, there's a way for them to kind of close some of that further gap on their own. If you can get up into the, $750,000, $800,000 range, which is pretty much where you're at, it would look on the surface like, a pretty easy way for them to at least plausibly balance their deal, would be to defer about that much more in fee, still leaving them at that point only with roughly half of the fee deferred, which is kind of a rule of thumb that often we want to try to not have people skinny their deal up so much that they're deferring more than half of the fee, and recognizing that it's still a really difficult time in which to nail any of these things down, just given the macroeconomic environment.
Okay, thank you. I learned something new, that so Choto for years past unused could become non-Choto funds. That's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and not to get too deep into that, but it's sort of this weird little quirk. It was frankly an unintended consequence of the language that got used to suspend the 24-month deadline for committing Choto funds, and it had the intended consequence of taking the deadline out of play, and the unintended consequence of once those funds have aged by 24 months, they could be moved out of the set aside.
Thank you. And it's helpful to know that Villas at Haywood, if they haven't deferred any of their developer fee, which is something we're seeing more commonly across applications. But if we found the 434, they could reduce their developer fee and hit go. Okay, so I guess my question, because we are really going on long here, and I don't want to keep you guys. I know everybody has a busy day and job ahead. Where is everybody at on this exact allocation right here, or do we need to change it out of Villas at Haywood? And if anybody's not feeling that, okay, then someone can make a motion.
Am I wrong? We don't know how much more. We may have 400,000 more that we don't know about.
Potential funds that could become any kind of funds, yes.
So we could go with, so you're saying we could possibly go with this, and then if we find out the others there, we could look at allocating that additional amount. That's kind of what.
Correct.
It's okay.
And then of course, that's right.
Ms. Turner, this is Peter. Just real quickly, just to make sure, and I know you all will make the most informed decision, but just as one quick reminder about the Villas at Haywood, This is a 9% it's a competitive application to NCHFA that we don't know whether or not they will be awarded. Certainly, they have to present a balanced budget, and your money would help in that, but they don't have the award in hand, unlike, for example, Fairhaven Meadows. The other thing I would say too is, of all the multifamily applications, this will be the highest home investment per unit of any of them, with the lowest credit pricing. So they've just to kind of put it in context, it doesn't mean it's not a worthy project, but all things being equal, they're getting the least amount of equity and asking for the largest per unit subsidy, just so that you're all aware.
This is helpful, and every time you guys speak, we get a little more in-depth critique into all of the applicants' feasibility. So how about I just ask you, Stephen and Peter, taking into account everything you've heard today, and that this consortium is interested in creating new units, dispersed county area. Of these remaining, I understand all 59% applications that are not funded or not awarded yet, so that kind of neutralizes that point. But of these remaining ones, what is your recommendation based on the strength of your application and all of that background you have studied?
Yeah, no, well, and I guess I was just about to, chime in after Peter and say, I mean, I think this has been really fascinating for us. And both of us early in our careers used to sit in meetings, allocation meetings, having these same kind of conversations. And you guys are in both an enviable and an unenviable position, right? The enviable position is you've got, there's none of the deals that are up on the screen that we would say like, man, that's just a non-starter, right? Like every one of these deals, is more likely than not to be viable if you are able to provide the funding they've asked for, and if a couple other things break their way. Given that anybody that doesn't have a 9% award in hand, only probably has about a 1 in 3 chance of getting that 9% award. And so it, at some level, all of these things are a little bit kind of on the margins, right? In terms of like, an extra penny here, a half a cent there, all of that. I think the, one of the things I would say about Mirabel was that, it does produce the largest number of deeply affordable units at 30% AMI of any deal, right? So there's a tremendous, the lower we go in the income scale, it's pretty, it's the easiest thing in the world for everybody to look and say this is prima facie that the units are more desperately needed the lower we go in the income scale. So that's a very attractive piece to that project. Again, the downside is, or if you want to make the criticism, you're only about 1% of the deal. There ought to be some way for them to figure out how to make a deal work if they only have to close a 1% gap. And then, again, the villas at Haywood is, kind of more put together and ready to go than White Pine. And, so I think it's really hard. I mean, I just want to recognize at the end of the day, it's something of a qualitative, judgment that a lot of people are, anybody looking in that doesn't get the call is going to have the opportunity to say, well, I think that was subjective. And so that, in that sense, you guys are in a very unenviable position.
Well, we've done this, and it strikes me that one thing we don't have this time is the discussion. Like last year, I think we were trying to really help Transylvania and we probably really need a geographic. I'd be curious to know if last time Henderson County got an award was X years ago. We're losing the context of how we're achieving successful projects in the region. I see Emily, but I'm warning us we are going to start losing people, and we have to have you for the vote. So we have to make this. Emily, go.
What I was going to say is actually, I mean, I don't want to make more work for staff, but it kind of sounds like the consortium is comfortable making a recommendation on those, tops, what is that, 5 items on this list, and then reconvening once we get a better idea of the CHOTO funds that are available. And perhaps we could get additional information on what the gap would be for some of these other projects in the rental construction.
Do we have for that before application deadlines? Probably. What is it, May 1?
I think so. I mean, our public comment period, we would just need to look at when that's starting. But I know for CDBG, we're meeting the 29th. So it'd be great to reconvene this group
do you
in
know
the next week or so.
Yeah, what's that deadline? Is it May 1? You might have just dropped off.
So, yeah, the submission will be in May. So it's a matter of backing up the deadline to do 30-day public comment. So ideally, if there needed to be further consideration by the consortium, it would need to happen this month. That would provide enough space to do that public comment period. And
what I'm hearing then is we pull that 434 back down to available. We get clear on what CHOTO from previous years may or may not be available, $200, $300, $400, $500,000. We get back together and we have to have a quorum, which is 8 of you or more, before the end of this month, or maybe the first week of April. And we then try and sort through which of these larger tax credit application projects we want to disperse funds to. And at that point, maybe we'll be able to do 2. Does that feel good? Okay. So I see Karen has her hand up, and then I'm going to make a motion.
I would completely support that. I just think we need a bit more time to really know how many dollars we have and really understand, get into the details. I just feel like we're jumping ahead just because we're out of time. And we all know that this is too important to make that type of decision. And I think we're all committed to devoting the time between now and the end of the month.
That sounds great. Jonathan, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe revisit, maybe for the next meeting, consideration of the Henderson County Habitat, the down payment assistance allocation, about sort of scaling that, especially if we're looking at trying to fully fund or fund as much of the tax credit projects for consideration in that application, and then reconsider where DPA lands once that has been completed.
Okay, that sounds great. So staff, for purposes of moving some of this forward, do you want us to make a motion today for these ones in green to just go ahead and move them forward, simplify the conversation at our next meeting, or deal with it all at once?
What I heard just then, though, is that we may reconsider habitat. So we would then reset that one.
So we leave it all open. We don't make any motions today. We reconvene, which you're going to have calendar invites in your inbox soon. I need you to actually reply yes and stick to it so that we know we have quorum. We don't hit anybody's deadlines and make them panic. Okay, then I believe we're going to actually not close this item. We're going to continue this item to our next agenda. And that brings us to item number 5, which is public comment. Dana, I'm not sure who's actually manning the phones. Do we have anybody that wants to make an extensive public comment about all these decisions?
There's no public comment in the queue.
Okay. It was a really deep, thorough conversation, everybody. I really appreciate all of your time. And thanks for so many of you showing up. Obviously, these are such important projects to all of our communities. And we will be in touch very shortly with calendar invites and trying to make sure we get enough of us present to re-discuss this. Thank you, everyone.
Have we, just for procedures, are we officially continuing the meeting?
Yes.
And do we have to have a vote on that?
I don't think so. We just haven't made the decision, so.
I think the question is clarification is continuing or actually holding another one. Is that correct, Karen?
Correct. Yes, correct.
I don't know if that matters. I guess that y'all can handle that, but I don't know.
I don't think procedurally we would have to have a motion to continue. I think it's okay. Hopefully I'm correct on that. All right. 11:40. Thank you for the extra time today, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch shortly about next meeting. Thank you. Be thinking about the 320 so that we can have that conversation when we're back together.